Michael Myers' mask wasn't the terrifying creation you might think it was. It cost a mere $1.98 at a thrift store on Hollywood Boulevard. The production designer, Tommy Lee Wallace, stumbled upon a William Shatner Captain Kirk mask. The idea wasn't to make something creepy. It was just a quick solution. Wallace widened the eye holes and painted it white. The blank, emotionless stare wasn't intentionally unsettling. In fact, Wallace later admitted that the emptiness of the expression was exactly what they needed. It wasn't angry, it wasn't sad, it wasn't anything. The filmmakers tried various other masks, including a clown version, but nothing struck the right chord until they repurposed Shatner's face. The fact that the mask belonged to one of the most famous Star Trek captains in history added another layer of twisted irony. Audiences would never know they were looking at the face of a pop culture icon. Michael Myers' face was, in essence, a blank slate. And that's exactly what made it so chilling. The casting of Jamie Lee Curtis in the role of Laurie Strode wasn't just about her acting chops. She was only 19 and had no experience in films at the time, but what truly caught producer Deborah Hill's eye was her last name. Jamie Lee was the daughter of Janet Leigh, famous for her iconic role as Marion Crane in Psycho. Hill and director John Carpenter saw this as an opportunity to link the new generation of horror to the classics. Despite the connection, Jamie Lee still had to prove herself. Her performance was grounded, bringing a vulnerability to Laurie while also infusing strength into her character. By the end of the shoot, Curtis wasn't just a newcomer. She unknowingly embodied the first true final girl in horror, a trope that would define the genre in the years to come. It was cinematic destiny, not nepotism, that led Jamie Lee Curtis to become the star she was. Donald Pleasence, a classically trained British actor with a distinguished career, seemed like an odd choice for a low-budget slasher film. His role as Dr. Loomis was pivotal, but how did he end up in this project? It turns out it was for a very personal reason. Pleasence's daughter was a fan of Carpenter's previous film, Assault on Precinct 13, and urged her father to take the role. Though Pleasence admitted that he didn't fully understand the script, he trusted Carpenter and believed in the director's vision. What he brought to the film was gravitas. His portrayal of Dr. Loomis added psychological depth to what could have easily been a simple teen slasher flick. Without him, Halloween might have just been a fun, mindless slasher, but with him, it became a mythic battle between good and unstoppable evil. The film's score is another testament to the low-budget, improvisational approach. Carpenter had no money for a grand orchestral score, so he decided to do it himself. Armed with a simple synth and 3 days to work, Carpenter crafted the now iconic 54 piano riff that would define Halloween's sound. The score wasn't just an afterthought, it became the very heartbeat of the film. At the time, critics didn't even mention the music, but audiences were transfixed. Carpenter later said, "If you can't afford to show fear, you have to make them hear." That simple, haunting melody became a constant companion to the dread on screen, and it shaped how horror soundtracks would evolve in the decades that followed. The name of Michael Myers was actually taken from a real person. It wasn't some eerie name pulled from the depths of horror lore. Michael Myers was the name of a British distributor who worked on Assault on Precinct 13. Carpenter decided to name the killer after him as a small token of gratitude. But imagine hearing your name attached to an unstoppable, faceless killer. The real Michael Myers had no idea his name would be associated with such terror until the film's release. It wasn't a personal dig, it was merely a practical choice, but it became one of the most recognized names in horror history. The movie was shot in an astonishingly short 20 days. With a budget of only $300,000, Carpenter had to work fast. In a typical film, shooting can take months, but Halloween was done in just 20 days. The crew worked 6 days a week, shooting up to 13 pages of the script a day. They had no choice but to cut corners. Actors had to change their clothes between scenes. Locations were redressed to look like different homes, and most importantly, the film was shot in the spring in California, but it was meant to represent fall in Illinois. There were no real autumn leaves, so the crew painted thousands of fake leaves and reused them for every take. The time crunch created a raw, gritty urgency that added to the tension and realism of the film. One of the most innovative aspects of Halloween was the use of the Steadicam shot. particularly in the opening sequence. The point-of-view shot of young Michael Myers committing his first murder would go on to be one of the most iconic moments in horror history. But at the time, Steadicam rigs were expensive and out of the budget. Instead, the crew used a panel rig and rehearsed the shot for hours. Cinematographer Dean Cundy helped to block out the entire scene without cuts, giving the audience the sense that they were seeing the world through the eyes of the killer. This technique made the horror personal. The audience wasn't just witnessing a murder, they were becoming part of it. The camera, through its eerily calm movements, became Michael Myers, and it drew viewers deeper into the terror. The lack of a costume budget forced many of the actors to wear their own clothes. This meant that Jamie Lee Curtis's iconic Laurie Strode outfit came from JCPenney, and it cost less than $100. Other cast members wore their own clothes too. This was a necessity, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. The lack of a costume budget contributed to the film's realism. The characters looked like everyday people, not movie stars, which helped sell the idea that these events could happen to anyone. They were your classmates, your friends, or your babysitter, and that grounded authenticity made the horror that much more intense. You weren't watching actors in a film. You were witnessing real people in a terrifying situation. John Carpenter's vision for Michael Myers was to make him a force of nature rather than a person. In the script, Myers wasn't even referred to by name, but simply as the Shape. Carpenter wanted him to be a blank slate devoid of any backstory, motive, or emotion. The less the audience knew about him, the scarier he would be. This lack of explanation set Halloween apart from other slasher films that relied on deep backstories for their villains. The terror came from the unknown, from the idea that this faceless, nameless entity was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike without warning. Despite being labeled a slasher film, Halloween has very little blood. In fact, many of the kills happen off-screen or with minimal gore. This was in part due to budget constraints, but Carpenter also knew that psychological horror was far more effective than blood and guts. He understood that what you don't see is often scarier than what you do. The suspense, the pacing, and the music all contributed to the tension. The audience's imagination filled in the blanks, making each kill feel more visceral than it actually was. It's a lesson that later horror films, eager to mimic Halloween's success, often missed. The fear wasn't in the gore, it was in the anticipation.
Despite being labeled a slasher film, Halloween has very little blood. In fact, many of the kills happen off-screen or with minimal gore. This was, in part, due to budget constraints, but Carpenter also knew that psychological horror was far more effective than blood and guts. He understood that what you don't see is often scarier than what you do. The suspense, the pacing, and the music all contributed to the tension. The audience's imagination filled in the blanks, making each kill feel more visceral than it actually was. It's a lesson that later horror films, eager to mimic Halloween's success, often missed. The fear wasn't in the gore. It was in the anticipation. The crew used the same handful of painted fall leaves over and over again. You'd never know it, but Halloween was filmed in sunny Pasadena, California. And it definitely wasn't autumn. There were no red or golden leaves on the ground. So production designer Deborah Hill and her team painted thousands of paper leaves and scattered them across lawns and sidewalks. After each take, they'd collect every single one and reuse them for the next shot. In one infamous moment, you can even spot palm trees in the background, something Illinois doesn't have. But nobody noticed at the time. Why? Because the illusion was that strong. A few painted leaves turned California into Haddonfield. Carpenter didn't want a sequel. He thought the story was done. After the smash success of Halloween, producers begged for a sequel, but Carpenter was reluctant. He never intended Halloween to be a franchise. To him, the story was simple. Evil appears, terrorizes, and vanishes. Done. When he finally agreed to write Halloween 2, he admitted to feeling stuck. "We had no idea what to write," he confessed. So, he made up the family connection between Laurie and Michael. That twist, that they were siblings, became central to the sequels, but Carpenter later called it a mistake, saying it boxed in the story. Not expansion, but compromise. The boogeyman should have stayed a mystery. The sound of Michael's knife was created using watermelons. Foley artists had to get creative. There was no budget for fancy sound libraries or elaborate sound stages. So to create the unsettling slice of Michael's knife entering flesh, they stabbed watermelons over and over. The result was a squishy, wet crunch that sounded sickeningly real. Sometimes they used cantaloupes, sometimes they mixed in audio from butcher shops. The goal was to make every kill feel visceral, even if you couldn't see it. That one sound, the quiet violence of it, made audiences flinch, and they never even knew it came from fruit salad. Nick Castle wasn't an actor. He was John Carpenter's college buddy. When Carpenter needed someone to wear the mask and move like the shape, he asked Castle to step in. His only direction, a just walk. No backstory, no emotion, no horror training. Castle later said he based Michael's walk on a blank curiosity, like someone watching ants. His understated robotic movement became the standard for slasher villains. Jason, Ghostface, even Leatherface owe a debt to Castle's calm, inhuman pacing. It wasn't performance, it was presence. Carpenter and Deborah Hill wrote the script in under 2 weeks. With producers eager to get the film made quickly and cheaply, Carpenter and Hill locked themselves in a room and wrote the script in just 10 days. Hill focused on the teenage girl's dialogue, drawing from her own high school experiences, while Carpenter built the structure around suspense and visual horror. Their divide-and-conquer method worked. The result was a tight, efficient screenplay that wastes no time. Every line serves the mood. For every scene builds tension. It wasn't a rush job. It was a surgical strike of horror writing. Before Halloween became Halloween, the film's working title was The Babysitter Murders. The original concept was a series of murders over several nights with different girls in different homes. But producer Irwin Yablans had a better idea. Set the entire film on one night. Halloween became the setting, and that condensed the tension. The new title instantly set a mood, a holiday, and a fear that every kid understood. It wasn't just about slashing. It was about the fear that something evil could come home with you on the spookiest night of the year. Carpenter had to final cut, despite the tiny budget. Even with such a low budget, Carpenter wasn't just handed creative control. Producer Mustafa Akkad wanted changes. Faster pacing, more scares, tighter edits. Carpenter pushed back. He believed in the slow burn, the creeping dread. In post-production, he re-edited scenes himself and adjusted the timing of scares. He also layered in his now legendary score, which turned many test screenings around. One executive said, "Without the music, it's nothing." Carpenter's insistence on atmosphere over action saved the film. Not compromise, but conviction. Halloween became a masterclass in mood because its director refused to cut corners.